Hello. It was a serene morning, but my mind felt anything but calm. Mia was across the kitchen, her phone in hand, typing away with a concentration that seemed too intense for the casual excuse she'd given. Just work stuff. She'd been saying that a lot lately. I took a sip from my mug, letting the warmth settle in my chest as I watched her. Over the past few weeks, subtle shifts in her behavior had grown into glaring signs that something wasn't quite right. She used to leave her phone lying around carelessly, but now it was always with her like a lifeline. Notifications were muted, and conversations ended abruptly when I entered the room. Then there were the late nights. "Big project," she'd say, flashing me that practice smile as she adjusted her tailor blazer before heading out the door. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But there was something in the way her explanations never quite matched the tone of her actions. Too much confidence layered over what felt like hesitation. "Any plans today?" Mia's voice broke through my thoughts. She didn't look up from her phone. I cleared my throat. "Just the usual. Meetings, calls, trying to keep the investors happy." She nodded absently, her fingers still dancing across the screen. I set the mug down, my gaze narrowing slightly. "What about you? More late meetings?" This time, she looked up. Her brown eyes met mine, and for a second I thought I saw a flicker of something. Guilt? Fear? But then it was gone, replaced by that perfect, poised expression I'd fallen for years ago. "Yeah," she said casually. "You know how it is? Client deadlines. I'm lucky if I make it home before midnight." I forced a smile, the corners of my mouth feeling stiff. "Of course. Gotta keep climbing that corporate ladder." Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, lips twitching, before she quickly locked the screen. The tension followed us into the evening, though I tried to push it aside as we headed to dinner with Hunter and Ava. It was a double date of sorts, something we hadn't done in months. Hunter and I went way back, best friends since middle school. We'd been inseparable back then, dreaming about our futures while wreaking havoc in our small Texas neighborhood. Ava was already seated when we arrived, her wavy blonde hair framing her face as she greeted us with a bright smile. Hunter, always the charmer, was at her side, holding a glass of wine. "Logan, Mia, there you are," he said, standing to give me a firm handshake. "Thought you two were going to bail." Mia slid into the booth beside me, brushing her hand through her sleek black hair. "We wouldn't miss it," she said with an ease that I envied. As the evening progressed, I found myself caught in a strange kind of daze. The restaurant was warm and lively, with bursts of laughter from nearby tables and the soft clinking of silverware. But I couldn't focus on the food or the conversation. Not with the way Mia was leaning slightly toward Hunter. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. They were laughing, sure, but that wasn't unusual. Hunter was funny, a natural storyteller who could command a room effortlessly. But as the dinner wore on, I couldn't ignore the way her hand would graze his arm or how she'd look at him, her eyes lingering a second too long. I glanced at Ava, who seemed oblivious, scrolling through photos on her phone as she talked about her latest yoga retreat. I tried to join in, tried to push the unease down, but it clawed its way back up every time Mia turned to Hunter with that smile. The smile that used to be just for me. By the time we got home, the unease had settled into a hard knot in my stomach. Mia excused herself to the bathroom, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the empty space where she'd just been. It wasn't just paranoia. I knew what I'd seen. When she emerged, she was already talking about her long day tomorrow and how she needed to get some rest. She kissed me lightly on the cheek, barely meeting my eyes before disappearing under the covers. I stayed awake long after her breathing steadied, the faint glow of her phone on the nightstand mocking me. The next morning, I decided to test her. Over breakfast, I told her I had to leave for Houston for a last-minute investor meeting. Her expression didn't waver, but there was something in the way she said, "Oh, that's too bad," that made my chest tighten. I kissed her goodbye, grabbed my bag, and drove to the end of our block before circling back. Parking a few streets over, I walked home, careful to stay out of sight. When I let myself into the house, it was quiet. Mia was gone, off to her meetings, no doubt. I moved quickly, retrieving the spyware software I'd prepared days ago. I'd hated the idea at first, It felt like crossing a line. But that was before I'd seen her with Hunter, before the doubt had taken root and refused to let go. I installed the program on her phone, syncing it to my laptop. Within minutes, I had access to her messages, calls, and location. My hands trembled as I worked, the weight of what I was doing pressing down on me. This wasn't who I wanted to be. But if she was lying to me, if she was betraying me, I needed to know. That night, I sat in my office, the laptop glowing in the darkness. At first, the messages were mundane. Conversations with coworkers, a reminder from her gym, a text from her sister. But then I saw his name, Hunter. I opened the thread, my pulse quickening. At first glance, it seemed innocent enough. Can't wait to catch up tomorrow. You're hilarious, as always. But then there were the emojis, smirking faces, winks. And then, miss you already. Last night was perfect. I stared at the words, my breath caught in my throat. There was no mistaking what they meant. In that moment, everything shifted. My heart, which had been hammering in my chest, went cold. The betrayal was there, undeniable and raw. I closed the laptop, my jaw tightening as a single thought crystallized in my mind. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. First, I needed proof. Proof that no one could deny. Proof that would tear their carefully crafted facade apart. The morning was cool, the kind of brisk autumn air that Austin rarely enjoyed this time of the year. I sat in my car, parked across the street from the house. The engine off, windows cracked just enough to let in the faint sound of rustling leaves. My fingers drummed against the steering wheel, each tap an echo of my racing thoughts. I told Mia the night before that I'd be gone for a couple of days. She'd barely looked up from her phone when she replied, "Safe travels." That hollow tone, so casual, so detached, played on a loop in my mind as I sat waiting. At 7:03 a.m., the front door opened. Mia stepped out, her black leggings and tank top hugging her figure in a way I used to admire, but now filled me with suspicion. Her hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, and her phone was strapped to her arm, her earbuds already in place. She paused on the porch, stretching her arms above her head, the picture of someone heading out for a brisk morning jog. Except I knew better. I stayed low in my seat as she walked down the driveway, her sneakers crunching softly against the gravel. Once she disappeared around the corner, I started the car, creeping a safe distance behind her. I'd done my homework the night before. According to the spyware on her phone, Mia had been heading to Zilker Park every morning for weeks, despite telling me she was running laps around the neighborhood. Her messages to Hunter the previous night hinted at a meeting, cryptic phrases like, "Same spot as always and see you there." My stomach churned as I followed her, keeping far enough back that she wouldn't spot me. The park came into view after 10 minutes, its sprawling greenery and winding paths bathed in the soft glow of the early morning sun. Mia veered off the main road, heading toward the more secluded trails. I parked near the entrance, grabbing my drone case from the passenger seat. My fingers worked quickly, assembling the small device, its sleek black frame glinting in the light. I stepped out of the car, keeping to the shadows of the trees as I launched the drone. It rose silently into the air, the hum of its rotors blending with the distant sound of birdsong. My phone buzzed as the live feed connected, the camera capturing a bird's-eye view of the park below. I spotted Mia easily, her dark ponytail swaying as she jogged along the dirt path. She stopped near the edge of the lake, her hand shielding her eyes as she scanned the area. A moment later, another figure appeared from the opposite direction. Hunter. Even through the grainy feed, I could recognize his confident stride, the way his fitted athletic shirt clung to his frame. My grip tightened on the controls as I maneuvered the drone closer, hovering high above the treetops. They met near a bench overlooking the water. Mia's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in months, her lips curving into a smile that felt like a punch to the gut. Hunter reached out, his hand brushing against her arm before trailing to her lower back. I shifted the drone, angling the camera for a clearer view. The two of them sat down, leaning in close as they spoke. I couldn't hear their words, but their body language said enough. The way Hunter's fingers lingered on her shoulder, the way Mia laughed softly, tilting her head just enough to show off the curve of her neck. It was all so intimate, so deliberate. And then they kissed. It wasn't hesitant or uncertain. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of kiss that spoke of familiarity, of routine. I felt a surge of bile rise in my throat, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. I forced myself to keep filming, to hold the drone steady as they pulled apart, their faces still close, their hands intertwined. Back in my car, I replayed the footage, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The evidence was there, undeniable and damning. But as I scanned the video, something else caught my eye: Hunter's phone. It was a brief moment, barely a second, but as he pulled it from his pocket, I caught a glimpse of the screen. A notification flashed across it. Deposit confirmed, Ava Reed. I froze, the words replaying in my mind. Ava's name, tied to a deposit? Why would Hunter need to use her name for anything? I opened a search on my phone, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Hunter had been riding high in the real estate world for years, his name plastered on billboards and luxury listings across Austin. But as I dug deeper, a pattern began to emerge. Accounts tied to Ava's name, shell companies with transactions that didn't quite add up. The implications hit me like a freight train. Hunter was using Ava's name to funnel money, likely to hide assets or fund his little escapades. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. By the time I got home, the anger that had been simmering all morning had turned into a cold, calculated resolve. I set the drone footage aside, transferring it to a secure folder on my laptop. This was only the beginning. I picked up my phone, scrolling to the number I'd saved weeks ago. The private investigator answered on the second ring. "It's Logan," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I need your help, and I need it fast." There was a pause on the other end before the investigator replied. "What are we dealing with?" I glanced at the laptop, the image of Mia and Hunter's kiss frozen on the screen. "Infidelity," I said, my tone sharp. "And something more. I'll send you the details." Hanging up, I stared at the screen for a moment longer, my chest tightening. This wasn't just about exposing Mia and Hunter anymore. This was about destroying the foundation they'd built their lives on. The air inside my office was still, heavy with anticipation as I stared at the folder resting on my desk. The private investigator had delivered it just an hour ago, but it might as well have been a ticking bomb. My laptop hummed quietly, its screen displaying the drone footage I had taken days earlier. But this folder? This was the nail in the coffin. Photos of Mia and Hunter entering a hotel, timestamps that aligned perfectly with their text exchanges, and even receipts tied to their clandestine meetings. I flipped the folder open, my hand steady, but my pulse racing. There was something surreal about seeing the betrayal laid bare in glossy photographs. There they were, holding hands in the parking lot, her head resting lightly against his shoulder. In another, they were walking into a room, the hotel's tacky floral carpet stretched behind them. My phone vibrated on the desk, jarring me out of my thoughts. I picked it up, glancing at the name on the screen. Ava. I hadn't spoken to her since that dinner weeks ago. Back then, she'd been cheerful, effervescent, blissfully unaware of the double life Hunter was leading. But now, knowing what I did, her name felt like a summons. I tapped to answer. "Logan," she said, her voice warm and familiar, though tinged with concern. "I was just thinking about you and Mia. It's been a while since we caught up." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. What was I supposed to say? "Funny you should call. I've got proof that your husband and my wife are screwing each other behind our backs." Instead, I said, "It's good to hear from you, Ava. I've actually been meaning to reach out." "Oh." Her tone lightened. "Something wrong?" "Not something," I said, my voice dropping. "Someone." There was silence on the other end, but I could feel her tension through the line. "What do you mean? Can we meet?" I asked. "It's important." The cafe was quiet, the hum of conversation a low background buzz as I waited at a corner table. My coffee sat untouched in front of me, steam curling upward in lazy wisps. I couldn't stop fidgeting, tapping my fingers against the edge of the table, glancing at the door every few seconds. When Ava walked in, her face lit up in recognition. She waved, weaving her way through the tables to join me. Her blonde hair was tied back, and she wore a soft gray sweater that seemed to swallow her petite frame. "Hey," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "This seems serious." What's going on? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Ava, I need you to keep an open mind. And I need you to trust me when I say I'm not doing this to hurt you. Her brows knitted together, worry creeping into her expression. Logan, what's wrong? Just tell me. I reached for the folder, sliding it across the table. I think it's better if I show you. She stared at it for a moment before pulling it toward her. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped it open. At first, her face was unreadable, her eyes scanning the photos and documents with methodical precision. But then her lips parted, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice breaking. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. This can't be real." "It's real," I said softly. I didn't want to believe it either, but I've seen it with my own eyes. She sat back in her chair, staring at the table as if it might somehow explain everything. "Hunter and Mia," she said, her voice barely audible. "How long has this been going on?" "I don't know exactly," I admitted, "but long enough. I've been tracking their movements, collecting evidence. It's all in there." Ava shook her head, her fingers gripping the edges of the folder like a lifeline. "I knew something was off," she said, her voice trembling. "He's been so distant lately, always working late, always on his damn phone." Her eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away, her expression hardening. "I'm not going to let them get away with this," she said, her voice steady now. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "I don't want to either. That's why I called you. I think we can help each other." She looked at me sharply, her eyes narrowing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we work together," I said. "They've been lying to us, betraying us. It's time we turn the tables." Ava considered this, her fingers drumming against the table. "You really think we can take them down?" "I don't just think it," I said. "I know it, and I already have a plan." As we talked, Ava's initial shock began to give way to something colder, more determined. She told me about the signs she'd ignored. Hunter's sudden obsession with money, the unexplained withdrawals from their joint accounts, his reluctance to let her near his work files. "He's been using me," she said bitterly. "I think he's funneling money through my yoga studio. There have been discrepancies in the books, but I brushed it off as mistakes. Now I'm not so sure." This was unexpected. "You think he's embezzling?" "It wouldn't surprise me," she said. "Hunter's always been good at hiding things when it suits him." Her revelation opened a new door, one that could amplify our revenge tenfold. If Hunter was laundering money through Ava's business, we could use it to expose him, to hit him where it hurt the most. "Ava," I said, meeting her gaze, "if you're willing, I think we could do more than just catch them in the act. We can destroy their entire facade." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes glinting with something fierce. "I'm willing," she said firmly. "Let's make them pay." In that moment, our alliance was forged, an unspoken agreement binding us together in shared betrayal and determination. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about reclaiming control, about showing Mia and Hunter that their lies and manipulation had consequences. The air in my office felt different now. It wasn't just another late night, surrounded by dim desk lamps and muted screens. It was the quiet before a storm I was determined to unleash. Sitting across from me, Ava sipped from a steaming mug of tea, her eyes locked on the spreadsheets displayed on my laptop. "This," she said, pointing at a highlighted section of the document, "is where the discrepancies start showing up. That's not my signature. I didn't authorize those transactions." I leaned forward, scrolling down to the other flagged entries. Each one had been marked by the forensic accountant Ava had hired, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, who'd spent days combing through the accounts tied to Ava's yoga studio. Hunter had been sloppy, and it was all here: falsified invoices, redirected payments, and even withdrawals disguised as maintenance fees. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. "You're sure you're ready to report this?" I asked, my voice low. Ava looked at me, her gaze unwavering. "He's the one who dragged my name into this mess. If I let him get away with it, it's only a matter of time before it all comes crashing down on me instead of him." Her resolve mirrored my own, and it was a reminder of how much we had to lose and how much we stood to gain. The first phase of our plan was about exposure. It wasn't enough to confront Mia and Hunter directly. They needed to feel the walls closing in on all sides. I tapped into my network, reaching out to a few trusted contacts, people who knew how to circulate sensitive information without it ever leading back to the source. Photos of Mia and Hunter's intimate moments at the hotel were uploaded to a private server, accessible only through an anonymous link. It was subtle at first, a handful of curious leaks to friends and acquaintances. Within days, whispers began circulating. "Did you hear about Mia? I saw the photos. Isn't that Hunter?" The rumors were like a match tossed onto dry kindling. Their carefully crafted reputations, Mia's as a respected HR executive, Hunter's as the charming real estate mogul, began to crack under the pressure. While the gossip spread, Ava tackled the financial trap. The accountant's findings were irrefutable, and Ava was meticulous in preparing her next steps. She drafted a report with Claire's help, outlining the fraud in excruciating detail. Every dollar Hunter had siphoned, every signature he had forged, was documented with timestamps and cross-referenced accounts. "I'll send this to the IRS next week," Ava said one evening, her tone sharp. "But first, I want him to squirm." She wasn't exaggerating. Using her influence within their social circles, Ava casually mentioned irregularities in Hunter's business practices during conversations with a few key people, clients and associates who wouldn't hesitate to distance themselves if they sensed trouble. For my part, I turned my attention to Mia's career. Her company had strict policies on professional conduct, and while they might overlook an employee's personal life, inappropriate messages exchanged on work devices were a different story. The spyware I'd installed on her phone had captured enough material to raise eyebrows. Texts like, "I can't stop thinking about last night. Meeting at the office is too risky. Let's stick to the hotel." I formatted a select few of these messages into a neatly compiled document and sent them anonymously to her company's HR department. It was ruthless, but I felt no guilt. Mia had betrayed me in every way imaginable, and if she thought she could hide behind her polished facade, she was sorely mistaken. As the days turned into weeks, Ava and I watched our plan take root. The ripple effects were immediate. Mia came home one evening, her face pale, her hands trembling. "I had the worst day at work," she said, dropping her bag on the counter. "Oh?" I asked, feigning disinterest. She sighed heavily, running a hand through her hair. "Some idiot sent fake screenshots to HR. They're investigating now, but I don't even know how to explain it. It's ridiculous." I nodded, hiding my satisfaction. "I'm sure it'll blow over." But I knew it wouldn't. Hunter, too, was feeling the heat. Ava kept me updated on his unraveling, her stories laced with equal parts amusement and frustration. "He's been on the phone nonstop," she told me during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "Calling clients, trying to smooth things over. He has no idea where the rumors are coming from, and it's driving him insane." I couldn't help but smirk. "Serves him right." Ava chuckled, but her expression softened as she leaned back in her chair. "You know, I never thought I'd be capable of something like this," she admitted. "Plotting revenge, sabotaging someone's life. It's not who I used to be." Her words struck a chord. I set down my coffee, meeting her gaze. "Neither did I," said. "But they made their choices. We're just making sure they face the consequences." Ava nodded, her eyes lingering on mine for a moment longer than necessary. There was something unspoken between us, a connection forged in shared pain and determination. One evening, as we worked side by side in my office, Ava reached for my hand. "Logan," she said softly, her voice steady. "Thank you for not letting me face this alone." Her touch was warm, grounding me in the midst of the chaos. "You're not alone," I said simply. We didn't need to say anything more. The silence that followed wasn't awkward or strained. It was filled with understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of everything we'd endured and everything we were about to take back. Phase by phase, the plan was unfolding, and there was no turning back. Mia and Hunter had no idea what was coming for them, and Ava and I weren't about to let up. The night stretched long and quiet, the kind of stillness that seems to amplify every little sound. The rhythmic clicking of my keyboard was the only noise in the room as I typed out the last few notes of the day's work. Across from me, Ava sat curled up on the couch, her laptop balanced precariously on her knees. Her golden hair was tied back loosely, wisps falling around her face as she scrolled through documents. We had spent hours poring over the latest developments. Hunter's dwindling client list, the growing whispers about Mia at her workplace. The cracks in their perfect lives were widening, and for the first time, I felt like we were truly gaining the upper hand. Still, there was an exhaustion that clung to both of us, a weight from the constant plotting and the emotional toll of what we were uncovering. Do you ever feel? Ava paused, looking up from her screen. Her blue eyes met mine, her expression hesitant. I don't know. Like you're losing yourself in all of this? Her words hung in the air for a moment, pulling my thoughts into a place I didn't often let them wander. Sometimes, I admitted, leaning back in my chair. But then I remind myself why we're doing it. They betrayed us, Ava. They lied, they cheated, and they thought they could get away with it. If we don't hold them accountable, who will? She nodded slowly, though her expression remained conflicted. I know you're right, but it still feels dark, you know? Like we've crossed a line we can't uncross. I stood, stretching my arms above my head before walking over to the couch. Sitting down beside her, I reached for her laptop, gently closing it and setting it aside. Look, I said, turning toward her. If you're having second thoughts, no, she interrupted quickly. Her hand darted out, brushing against mine before she pulled it back. I'm not backing out. I don't want to become like them. You won't, I said firmly. We won't. What we're doing isn't about stooping to their level. It's about making sure they face the consequences of their actions. She exhaled a shaky breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. You always know what to say, she murmured, a faint smile tugging at her lips. I doubt that, I said with a chuckle, but her smile lingered, and for a moment, the room felt lighter. The hours crept by as we worked in comfortable silence, the hum of the desk lamp casting a soft glow around the room. By the time the clock struck midnight, Ava had shifted closer, her presence warm and grounding. You've got a knack for this, she said suddenly, her voice breaking the quiet. For what? Strategizing. Planning. It's like you're running some kind of chess game. I laughed softly. Well, life in the startup world teaches you a thing or two about staying 3 steps ahead, but you're not so bad yourself. She tilted her head, a playful glint in her eye. Oh, what's my talent? Determination, I said without hesitation. Even when everything is falling apart, you keep moving forward. That's not something you see every day. Her cheeks flushed slightly, and she looked down, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Thanks, Logan, she said softly. I don't think I could have done any of this without you. Her words stirred something deep in my chest, a warmth that felt almost foreign after weeks of cold calculation and simmering anger. I shifted slightly, my hand brushing against hers as I reached for the pen resting on the coffee table. She froze for a moment, her breath hitching, and when our eyes met, the air between us seemed to shift. Neither of us moved at first, as if testing the boundary we had carefully maintained. But then, like the breaking of a dam, the tension spilled over. I leaned in, my gaze flicking to her lips for just a fraction of a second before closing the distance. When our lips met, it was tentative at first, as if we were both afraid to cross a line that couldn't be redrawn. But the hesitation quickly gave way to something deeper, more urgent. Her hand slid up to my shoulder, pulling me closer as the kiss deepened. My heart raced, the weeks of shared pain and unspoken connection bubbling to the surface in a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion. But then, just as quickly as it began, reality came crashing back. I pulled away, my breathing uneven as I stared at her, searching her face for a sign of what she was feeling. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted slightly, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she reached up, brushing her fingers against her mouth as if trying to process what had just happened. I'm sorry, I said quickly, standing and running a hand through my hair. I shouldn't have. Don't, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Don't apologize. It wasn't just you. She stood as well, her expression conflicted. I think I should go. I nodded, unable to find the right words to say. Okay. The next morning, I woke to a text from Ava. Can we talk later? I think we need to figure out what last night means for us. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing out a reply. Of course. Let me know when you're free. As I set my phone down, something outside the window caught my attention. Ava's car was still parked on the street where she had left it the night before. But something was different. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the crisp morning air biting against my skin. As I approached her car, I saw it, a single sheet of paper tucked under her windshield wiper. Pulling it free, I unfolded the note, my stomach twisting as I read the words scrawled in bold, uneven handwriting. I know what you're doing. My chest tightened, the implications of the message hitting me like a freight train. Someone knew. Someone was watching. I glanced around the street, but it was empty, the quiet suburban neighborhood, giving no hint of who might have left the note. Clenching it tightly in my hand, I headed back inside, my mind racing. Ava needed to know. I grabbed my phone, dialing her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. Logan? What's going on? We've got a problem, I said, my tone sharp. Someone left a note on your car. Her breath hitched. What did it say? I hesitated, then read the words aloud. There was silence on the other end, but I could feel her fear. What do we do? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We keep going, I said firmly. Whatever this is, whoever left that note, they're not going to stop us. I could hear her exhale shakily. Okay, she said. But Logan, we need to be careful. We will, I promised, my mind already spinning with possibilities. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across the kitchen floor. I stood at the counter, stirring my coffee absently, my thoughts running a mile a minute. Mia hadn't come downstairs yet, but that didn't surprise me. She had been quieter lately, more withdrawn, and I suspected the weight of her double life was beginning to take its toll. I glanced at the clock. I needed to plant the seed soon, and it had to be just right. If I pushed too hard, she might catch on. If I was too casual, she might shrug it off entirely. A few minutes later, I heard her footsteps descending the stairs, followed by the soft shuffle of her slippers against the tile. Morning, she said, her voice light but strained. She moved to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water and taking a long sip. Morning, I replied, my tone carefully neutral. Big day ahead? She hesitated, her grip tightening on the bottle. Yeah, actually, I've got a client lunch and then some meetings at the office. Might be a late one. I nodded, pretending to check my phone. Sounds busy. Where's the lunch? Her hesitation was so slight, I almost missed it. Oh, just downtown? That Italian place near the office. You know the one. It was a vague enough answer to pass as casual, but I knew better. The spyware on her phone told a different story. There was no lunch meeting on her calendar, no dinner plans logged. I sipped my coffee, masking my irritation. Sounds nice. Maybe we can grab dinner tomorrow night, then. It feels like it's been a while since we had a night, just the two of us. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, that sounds good. I watched her leave the room, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, and knew the trap was set. Later that afternoon, I met with the private investigator at a coffee shop across town. He was a wiry man in his late 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I'll tail her this evening, he said, sliding a small recorder across the table. If she meets with him, I'll have photos, timestamps, and a full log by tomorrow morning. Good, I said, my voice clipped. They're getting sloppy. She didn't even try to hide how vague she was with me this morning. He smirked. That's the thing about cheaters. They always think they're smarter than everyone else. Makes it easier for guys like me. I nodded, though my stomach churned at the thought of what he might uncover tonight. As the hours ticked by, I kept myself busy. I reviewed emails, updated spreadsheets, and tried to focus on anything other than the gnawing anticipation. But when my phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m., all pretense of productivity vanished. A text from the investigator flashed on the screen. They're at the Sapphire Hotel. Room 312. Photos and video attached. I opened the file, my heart pounding. The images were grainy, but clear enough to confirm everything I already knew. Mia and Hunter, walking side by side into the hotel lobby, their heads close as they whispered to each other. In one photo, his hand rested on her lower back, and in another, she smiled up at him like he was the only man in the world. My grip tightened on the phone. The evidence was undeniable, and yet the rage bubbling inside me didn't feel like vindication. It felt like a storm that wouldn't quiet until I tore their lives apart piece by piece. The next day, Ava called me, her voice sharp and urgent. "It's done," she said without preamble. "The IRS has the report." I leaned back in my chair, rubbing a hand over my face. "How long do you think it'll take before they act on it?" "Not long," she replied. "Claire said the evidence is solid. Hunter's going to have a hell of a time explaining how those accounts ended up in my name." "Good," I said, my voice low. "That's one less thing for us to worry about." Ava hesitated. "Logan, do you ever wonder if they suspect us? That maybe they've figured out we're not just sitting back and taking this?" I thought about Mia's behavior that morning. The slight edge in her voice, the way she clutched her phone like a lifeline. "It's possible," I admitted. "But I think they're too wrapped up in their own lies to focus on us. For now, anyway." I was wrong. That evening, Mia cornered me in the living room, her expression tense. "Logan," she began, her tone carefully measured. "Have you noticed anything weird with your phone lately? Like strange apps or messages?" The question caught me off guard, but I kept my face neutral. "No, why?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "I don't know. It's probably nothing, but my phone's been acting strange. Messages disappearing, apps glitching. It's just weird." I frowned, feigning concern. "Maybe it's a virus? You should take it to the tech guys at your office." "Yeah," she said quickly, though her eyes darted away. "Maybe." As she walked away, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, I felt a flicker of unease. She was starting to suspect something, and if she confided in Hunter, it could complicate everything. I didn't have to wait long to find out. That night, the spyware picked up their conversation. "Hunter," she texted, "I think Logan knows something. My phone's been acting weird, and he's been asking questions." "You're overthinking it," he replied almost immediately. "Logan's too wrapped up in his work to notice anything. Just play it cool." I stared at the messages, my jaw tightening. Hunter's arrogance was infuriating, but his dismissal of Mia's concerns gave me a twisted sense of satisfaction. They were scrambling, trying to keep their lies intact, and the cracks were beginning to show. The day had a strange sort of calm to it, like the eerie stillness before a storm. I'd planned everything down to the smallest detail. The reservations were set, the folder of evidence tucked neatly into my briefcase, and my expression carefully rehearsed in the mirror. I glanced at the clock on my desk. 6:15 p.m. The restaurant was only 15 minutes away, but I wanted to arrive early, just to make sure everything was perfect. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the opening act of a carefully choreographed finale. "Dinner at Le Jardin?" Mia had asked earlier, her voice tinged with surprise when I mentioned it. I nodded, keeping my tone casual. "It's been a while since we've gone out, just the two of us. Thought it might be nice." She had hesitated for the briefest moment, her eyes searching mine, but then she smiled. "That sounds lovely. Lovely." She had no idea. The restaurant was quiet when we arrived, the dim lighting and soft strains of classical music creating an intimate atmosphere. Mia wore a simple black dress, her hair swept back into an elegant bun. She looked beautiful, and for a fleeting second, I almost let myself remember the woman I had fallen in love with years ago. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who had lied to my face for months. The waiter greeted us with a warm smile, leading us to a small table by the window. I pulled out Mia's chair, and she settled in, glancing around the room. "This is nice," she said, her voice light but slightly guarded. "You've been full of surprises lately." I forced a smile, taking my seat across from her. "I thought we deserved a little break. Things have been tense." She laughed softly, reaching for the glass of water in front of her. "That's an understatement." We ordered our meals, exchanging polite small talk as the minutes ticked by. Mia was trying to be her usual charming self, but I could see the cracks in her facade. The way her fingers tapped lightly against the edge of her glass, the way her eyes flicked to her phone every few seconds. Finally, as the waiter cleared our plates, I decided it was time. "Mia," I said, my voice steady but firm. "There's something I need to talk to you about." She froze for half a second before recovering, her smile tightening. "Oh, what's on your mind?" I reached for my briefcase, pulling out the folder and setting it on the table between us. Her eyes flicked to it, her brows furrowing in confusion. "What's this?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Open it," I said simply. She hesitated, her fingers hovering over the edge of the folder before finally pulling it toward her. As she flipped it open, the color drained from her face. The first photo was of her and Hunter in the hotel parking lot, their hands intertwined. The second showed them kissing by the elevator. Beneath the photos were printed copies of their text messages, each one more damning than the last. Her hand flew to her mouth, her breathing quickening. "Logan, don't." I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't lie to me, Mia." "Not anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Just a cold, unrelenting clarity. "How long?" I asked, leaning forward. "How long have you been lying to me? Sneaking around behind my back?" She shook her head, her voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." "Explain?" I snapped, cutting her off. "Explain what? The hotel receipts? The texts? The photos? What exactly is there to explain, Mia?" She flinched, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Logan, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But I never stopped loving you." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Love? Don't talk to me about love, Mia. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. You wouldn't have betrayed me with him." Her hands trembled as she reached for mine, but I pulled back, shaking my head. "I trusted you," I said, my voice low but full of venom. "I gave you everything, and you threw it away. For what? For Hunter." Her sobs grew louder, drawing the attention of a few nearby diners, but I didn't care. "Let them watch. Let them see the truth. I'm filing for divorce," I said coldly, my words cutting through her cries like a knife. "And don't even think about trying to spin this around. I have everything I need to make sure you walk away with nothing." While Mia's world crumbled in the middle of that restaurant, another storm was brewing at Ava's house. She had waited for Hunter to come home, pacing the living room with the stack of financial documents in her hands. When the door finally opened, she turned to face him, her expression icy. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but steely. Hunter raised an eyebrow, clearly caught off guard. "Can it wait? I've had a long day." "No," she said firmly. "It can't." She threw the documents onto the coffee table, watching as his eyes scanned the pages. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of panic. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "It's everything," Ava said, crossing her arms. "Every lie you've told, every dollar you've stolen. And if you don't start talking, I'll make sure everyone knows about it." Hunter's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Ava shot back, her voice unwavering. "You've already humiliated me with Mia. Do you really think I have anything left to lose?" By the end of the night, both Mia and Hunter were left reeling, their carefully constructed lies shattered. Mia pleaded for forgiveness, her tears flowing freely as she tried to convince me to give her another chance. But I stayed cold, unmoved by her desperate apologies. At the same time, Hunter crumbled under Ava's pressure, his arrogance giving way to panic as he realized just how deep he was in. The courthouse was cold and impersonal, the kind of place that seemed to sap the color from everything around it. I sat at the long oak table, my lawyer to my left, her expression a mix of confidence and calm. Across the room, Mia sat with her own attorney, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a twinge of something close to pity. But it passed quickly. Pity had no place here. Not after everything. The judge began reading through the agreements we had spent weeks hammering out. My lawyer had been relentless, wielding the evidence of Mia's affair like a weapon. The result was exactly what I had hoped for. I kept the house, retained control of my business interests, and secured the lion's share of our assets. Mia was left with a small settlement, barely enough to scrape by. Her lawyer had tried to argue for more, but the photos, the texts, the receipts, it was all too much to overcome. When the judge finally asked if we both agreed to the terms, Mia hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded as well, my voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor." With the bang of a gavel, it was over. The news about Hunter broke less than a week later. Ava had been thorough, ensuring the IRS had everything they needed to build an airtight case. The rumors about his shady financial dealings had already spread through the real estate world, but the official investigation sealed his fate. Clients dropped him like a bad habit, his name scrubbed from listings and business directories almost overnight. By the time the press got wind of it, Hunter's reputation was in tatters. Ava and I watched it unfold from my living room, the news anchor's voice crisp and detached as she recounted the scandal. "Hunter's done," Ava said, setting down her glass of wine. Her tone was calm, but I could see the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. "He deserves it," I said simply. She turned to me, her gaze softening. "So does Mia." I nodded, though I felt a strange sense of finality creeping in. For weeks, I had been fueled by anger, by the need to make them pay. And now, with everything falling into place, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't allowed myself to consider before: relief. Ava and I continued seeing each other, though it wasn't like before. The fiery intensity of our plotting had given way to something quieter, more introspective. We talked about everything: our marriages, our mistakes, our hopes for what came next. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Ava turned to me. "Do you think we're doing this the right way?" she asked, her voice soft. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I mean us. This. Whatever we're building here. Are we just clinging to each other because of what we've been through?" I considered her words carefully before replying. "I think it started that way," I admitted. "But now, I don't know. I feel like I'm starting to see you, not just someone who went through the same thing I did, but you. And I like what I see." Her cheeks flushed, and she smiled faintly. "I like what I see too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't rush anything. We had both been through too much to dive headfirst into something new. But slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild. Not just our lives, but ourselves. The house felt different now, quieter but more peaceful. I spent hours in the office. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The company was thriving, and with Mia gone, I found myself making decisions with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. One evening, as I packed up for the day, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the anger, the revenge. It had been a whirlwind, a storm that had threatened to tear everything apart. But in the end, I had come out stronger. I had found someone who understood me in a way Mia never had, someone who didn't just see me as a means to an end. Ava and I were still figuring out what we were to each other, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Bye-bye.